What if one of the greatest voices of a generation, someone who redefined soul music, vanished from the world stage, not because he wanted to, but because the world demanded too much of him? What if the struggles behind the fame, the heartbreak, and the silence were far deeper than anyone could imagine? Tonight, we uncover the untold story of D'Angelo, his rise, his battles, his music, and the hidden truths of the final years of a legend whose voice will echo forever. Before he became a global icon, before the Grammy wins and sold-out tours, D'Angelo was simply Michael Eugene Archer, a quiet and gifted boy growing up in Richmond, Virginia. Raised in a deeply spiritual household, his father, a Pentecostal minister, introduced him to the rhythms and melodies of the church choir at an early age. It was there, among the harmonies of gospel music and the fervent energy of worship, that young Michael's voice began to stand out. It wasn't merely talent that drew attention, it was the raw spirit in every note he sang. Congregants often remarked that his voice carried the weight of prayer, that each song felt less like performance and more like a heartfelt conversation with the divine. By the time he reached his teenage years, Michael was already absorbing the lessons of soul legends, Marvin Gaye, Al Green, Prince, and weaving their influence into his own growing sense of artistry. Yet for him, music was never just about entertainment. He viewed it as a language capable of bridging the human and the divine, a medium to communicate emotion in its purest form. Every chord, every melody, every pause was deliberate, a reflection of a young man intent on connecting with something greater than himself. In 1995, Michael Archer stepped out of the quiet streets of Richmond and into the global spotlight under his stage name D'Angelo. His debut album, Brown Sugar, didn't merely make waves, it redefined an entire genre. At a time when R&B was dominated by polished commercial production, D'Angelo's music was raw, soulful, and human. Songs like Lady, Cruisin', and Brown Sugar blended the grooves of funk, the spirituality of gospel, and the sensuality of classic soul in a way that hadn't been heard in decades. Critics hailed him as the face of a new movement, neo-soul. Alongside contemporaries like Erykah Badu and Maxwell, D'Angelo was reviving the artistry and authenticity of soul music for a generation yearning for something real. What set him apart wasn't simply his technical skill, but the depth of motion embedded in every note. His voice had the ability to make listeners feel seen, to awaken memories of love and loss, and to remind them of the beauty of vulnerability. Unlike many artists molded by record labels, D'Angelo's artistry came directly from his heart, unfiltered, unrefined, and undeniably human. It was this authenticity that resonated with fans and critics alike, and it laid the foundation for a career that would become legendary. By the year 2000, D'Angelo had solidified his place in music history with the release of Voodoo. The album was a masterpiece, a daring fusion of soul, funk, and R&B, characterized by vulnerability, sensuality, and spiritual depth. Critics compared his work to that of Prince and Stevie Wonder, celebrating its emotional resonance and musical sophistication. Yet alongside the acclaim came unexpected challenges. The music video for Untitled, How Does It Feel, was a cultural phenomenon. Filmed in one continuous take, it showcased D'Angelo's bare torso as he sang with raw, hypnotic emotion. While the video captured the attention of millions, it also thrust him into a spotlight he never sought. Overnight, D'Angelo became one of the most desired men in music. Fans and industry executives were fixated on his body rather than his artistry, turning his vulnerability into an objectified spectacle. The very qualities that had made him unique, his intimacy, his emotional honesty, were being commercialized and distorted. Friends and collaborators observed his growing discomfort as the constant pressure weighed heavily on him. The world wanted Magic Mike. D'Angelo wanted to be Marvin Gaye. The dissonance between his spiritual connection to music and the demands of fame became suffocating, ultimately pushing him toward a period of isolation, self-doubt, and substance abuse. By 2001, D'Angelo had retreated almost entirely from public life. The confident, sensual performer who had commanded stages with effortless charisma now avoided cameras, interviews, and tours. Rumors swirled about depression, addiction, and struggles with his faith, But the reality was far more complex. The young man who had once embodied music's transformative power was now battling for his own survival in ways the world couldn't see. Behind closed doors, he wrestled with the immense pressure of fame, the erosion of privacy, and the internal conflict between his public persona and personal identity. Alcohol became a crutch, isolation a shield, and in 2005, a near-fatal car accident shook him to his core. Friends described it as a moment of reckoning, a divine intervention, a chance to confront pain and begin the slow process of healing. Surrounded by a small circle of family and friends, including Angie Stone, the mother of his son, D'Angelo entered rehab and gradually began rebuilding himself, not as a superstar, but as a man reconnecting with his purpose, faith, and creative essence. After more than a decade away from the public eye, D'Angelo returned in December 2014 with Black Messiah. The album dropped suddenly, without fanfare, but its impact was immediate and profound. Unlike a traditional comeback, it was a statement, a fusion of soul, political urgency, and deeply human storytelling. At a time when America was experiencing protests and upheaval over racial injustice, Black Messiah felt like a soundtrack for resistance and resilience. Tracks like The Charade captured the pain, hope, and determination of a generation, while also reflecting D'Angelo's personal journey through loss, recovery, and reflection. For him, the album was never about reclaiming fame. It was about reclaiming faith, voice, and artistic integrity. Critics celebrated it as one of the best albums of the decade, praising its raw honesty and spiritual depth. Fans described his rare live performances as almost religious experiences, where every note and lyric felt imbued with survival and redemption. Behind the scenes, D'Angelo was facing his final and most challenging battle. Around 2019, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, one of the most aggressive and devastating forms of the disease. True to his lifelong ethos, he kept the struggle private, never seeking public attention or sympathy. Those closest to him described a man who approached his illness with quiet strength, leaning on faith, family, and music. The same three pillars that had carried him through decades of life's storms. Even during treatment, D'Angelo continued to write and record in private, telling a trusted engineer, "If this body gives out, I want the music to live on." In the final months of his life, he returned to his roots, spending time in Richmond, revisiting his childhood church, mentoring young musicians, and reflecting on mortality with acceptance rather than fear. When he passed peacefully, surrounded by his son, mother, and loved ones, there were no cameras, no statements, just quiet, love, and music. D'Angelo's passing sent shockwaves through the music world, but those who truly knew him understood that even in death, he had lived and departed on his own terms, privately, gracefully, and purposefully. Tributes poured in from fans, fellow artists, and collaborators, all celebrating the authenticity and soul he brought to music. Questlove described him as a man who never chased fame, only truth. Maxwell said he was the bridge between pain and beauty. Ordinary fans shared stories of how D'Angelo's music had helped them through grief, addiction, and heartbreak, proving that his work did more than entertain, it healed. Music critics revisited his catalog, calling Brown Sugar, Voodoo, and Black Messiah the holy trinity of neo-soul. In a world that moves too fast, D'Angelo forced listeners to slow down, to feel, to reflect. His message was simple yet profound. True art transcends the body, the fame, and even death itself. D'Angelo may have left the stage, but his music, his spirit, and his message will play on forever. His voice, haunting, soft, and divine, reminds us that art born from struggle and faith never truly dies. For those who loved him, he remains a teacher, a healer, and a soul who connected humanity through melody. Rest in peace, D'Angelo. The soul lives on.